I killed him 10 years ago on the dusty street of Silver Grind. A bullet through the chest. But today he walked into my saloon with a smile. Alive, untouched, unbroken. And he didn't come to kill me. He came to make me understand what I lost when I chose revenge over love. These lands know pain better than joy. Every mark in the sand tells a story, but folks rarely listen. I saw this tale with my own eyes, like the crackle of a fire at night. The shadows of the past don't leave. You'd best listen close. Out here, it's the only way to survive. The Golden Saloon was filled with the familiar chaos of a frontier evening. The clink of glasses, the harsh laughter of drunk cattle ranchers, the creak of wooden floors beneath the feet of dancing girls in dark dresses. Kerosene lamps cast flickering shadows on walls stained with tobacco smoke and the weariness of forgotten years. The walls bore marks, stains from whiskey spilled, blood shed, tears wept by those no one remembered. The mirror behind the bar reflected faces, faces of people who came here to forget something, someone, or to find a reason to keep living another day in this godforsaken desert. 10 years. Exactly 10 years had passed since Jack Molten left this town, leaving behind destruction, death, and one gunshot that he thought had ended everything. Ended his old life, his mistakes, his sins. He sat in the corner of the saloon, away from the entrance, where he could see anyone who came through the door. It was a habit cultivated over years of living outside the law. Years where every stranger could be your enemy or your judge. The whiskey in his glass was cheap, bitter, leaving the taste of copper metal on his tongue. Jack had stopped noticing taste long ago. Everything in life lost its flavor after that day on Silver Grind Street. The gunslinger watched the entrance when it screeched open on iron hinges. Dust from the sun-baked street poured inside along with a wave of scorching air, like a ghost from the desert, like the breath of death itself. For a moment, the saloon filled with golden light that seemed unreal, as if someone had opened the gates of heaven and let hellfire seep through the crack. A figure appeared in the doorway, tall, dressed in a black suit that was expensive and well-tailored, but its condition spoke of long travels, of a life on the road, of wandering by a man who had lost his home. The hat was pulled low, so that the face was hidden in deep shadow. But Jack recognized him by his gait, by the turn of his shoulders, by how the man stood in the doorway, like a predator at the edge of an ambush, like a wolf standing at the entrance to another wolf's den. His heart stopped, his breath caught in his throat, as if invisible hands were squeezing his windpipe. Every muscle in his body tensed so hard that joints crackled and bones hummed. This was Cass Turner. Impossible. Cass should have been lying in the earth at Silver Grind Cemetery, buried deep, where no one would find him, where moles and worms would erase his face from the world. Jack remembered the feeling of the gun's recoil, remembered how the air tore with the sound of gunfire, remembered how Cass fell to his knees, remembered the blood spreading across his white shirt like black ink on paper, remembered a scream of pain, the sound his once best friend made when the bullet tore through him, remembered how Cass fell, how his body hit the dust, how his eyes looked at Jack with an expression that was something more than pain. It was betrayal. It was a broken heart. It was the death of everything they had been together. But there he stood, in the doorway of the saloon, alive, breathing, and slowly, very slowly, removing his hat. The same face, the same frightening smile that once meant both danger and loyalty. Those same cold gray eyes that Jack had seen in dreams when sleep finally came. Those same features that Jack had both hated and loved in life. Eyes that looked at him with sadness, as if Cass knew all the mistakes Jack would make and simply wanted to give him a chance to change. Cass looked directly in Jack's direction. He saw him, recognized him. Their gazes crossed through the smoke-filled air of the saloon, across a distance that was more than just space. It was the distance of betrayal, 10 years of pain, the distance between death and life, between hell and heaven. A shadow fell between them, and the saloon suddenly became very small, very narrow, like a coffin. Jack felt a chill run down his spine, like an icy hand of fate touching his vertebrae. His right hand slowly slid down to his holster where his loyal revolver lay, but immediately stopped. He didn't draw his weapon. For some reason, Jack knew that drawing his gun would be a mistake. Instead, he just sat watching. Cass moved slowly through the crowd of drunk people who didn't understand that death itself, or what was left of it, had walked into their saloon. People instinctively parted before him, sensing that cold danger even in their drunkenness, even in their ignorance. It was an energy emanating from Cass, the energy of a man who had dealt with a turning point in his life. The bartender reacted quickly, ducking behind the counter. The remaining patrons instinctively moved to the sides, creating open space, as if they were actors in a play written by fate, a script that had been written before their birth. Anyone who had lived in the Wild West long enough recognized the approach of the end. It was a taste in the air, the specific taste of electricity before a storm, the feeling of impending catastrophe that would change lives forever. Cass stopped a few steps from Jack. Between them hung a dangerous gaze. Between them lay years of absence. All those nights when Jack woke remembering the gunshot, remembering the pain in his heart, remembering the woman he had shot for. Sarah Hollister, a name that Jack cursed every day, every night, a name that was poison and medicine at the same time. Long 10 years during which Jack had tried to forget Cass Turner's name, tried to forget why he did it, tried to forget the girl with brown eyes who smiled like an angel, but possibly had a heart as black as coal, as dark as a night without stars. Jack only learned years later that angels rarely come with honesty, that beauty rarely goes hand in hand with truth. The saloon began to empty slowly, reluctantly, as if people feared turning their backs completely on disaster, as if they sensed that something would happen now that would change their understanding of what was right and just. People flowed to the doors like water from a leaky bucket, leaving behind chairs and full glasses, leaving behind half-eaten food and unfinished conversations. Nobody wanted to witness what would happen next. The atmosphere in the saloon changed with each passing second. It became thicker, denser, as if the air itself was preparing for an explosion, as if the earth was preparing to shake. Jack slowly sank into his chair, his pistol remaining in its holster, because you cannot kill a ghost twice. Besides, he knew Cass hadn't come to kill. If Cass had wanted him dead, Jack would have been dead a minute ago, when they looked into each other's eyes across smoke and oblivion. Cass took the seat across from him, sprawling with deliberate arrogance, boots on the table as if it was his home, his domain, his kingdom. He smiled. All the time he smiled that strange, painful smile that seemed to be the burden of his life, the weight of his revenge. 10 years ago, when Jack shot him in the chest on the dusty street of Silver Grind, when the sun was sitting behind him, leaving long shadows, he didn't know the bullet had passed by his heart. It was pure chance, pure luck, or perhaps divine providence. Jack no longer knew what to believe, because faith had been shattered along with his love. Cass told him this with bitter mockery in his voice, with that smile that was both regret and triumph, both sorrow about lost friendship. Lucky Molten, pure luck. The bullet entered the left side of my chest and passed straight through, exiting my back in a spray of blood. It passed through my lung, barely missing the artery that would have ended everything. I fell. Blood rushed from the wound, flowed down my body, created a pool in the dust, but I didn't die. That wound was in me like a scar from fate, like a sign that I was chosen for something greater. It hurt. The pain was so sharp that consciousness switched off and back on like a lamp flickering in storm wind. But I survived. Vagrants found me in the Blue Hills area on the 3rd day, when I was already preparing to meet death, when I was already hearing voices of angels calling me. They took me to the cabin of a mountain hermit named Henry, who healed criminals without asking questions, because he himself was a criminal who understood pain that was more than just a physical wound. I recovered for 2 years. 2 years I lay in that cabin, listening to the sounds of nature, listening to wolves crying in the night, listening to wind rushing through mountain gorges, listening to the roar of the river below that flowed without stopping, without forgetting. 2 years I thought about betrayal, about pain that was both physical and spiritual at the same time, about pain that was deeper than any blow. 2 years I recovered my strength, but not my dream. The dream was broken. Jack Molten, Cass's best friend, his brother-in-arms, the guy they'd robbed banks with, fought competing gangs with, the guy he was ready to die for. They grew up together, taught each other to kill, taught each other to live. They were like two halves of one whole. And for what? For some woman. For Sarah Hollister, daughter of a rich cattle rancher, who wore white dresses like a bride, smiled like an angel, but had a heart as black as coal, as dark as night without stars. Cass said he met her in the town of Rockdale 2 years ago. She had married some oil baron, rich and influential, a man who had money but no heart, who had power but no humanity. She lives in a big house on a hill, rides in a carriage with gold ornaments, like a queen who forgot where she came from. She forgot Jack Molten's name 2 weeks after he left. Just forgot, like forgetting dreams upon waking, like forgetting words to a song you heard long ago. Cass handed him a letter. The envelope was yellow with time. The paper was thin like a spider's web, like a breath of wind. Sarah wrote it right after learning that Jack was alive, that he wasn't hanged, that he escaped with money from the last bank they robbed together. But she didn't send this letter to Jack. She sent it to Cass, because Cass stayed in town, because Cass was easier to find, because Cass was weaker, and she knew she could manipulate him, like a puppeteer manipulates a puppet. Jack held the letter with trembling hands. The ink had already faded, smudged, but the words remained sharp, harsh, like shards of glass, like ice on a cold night. Tell him I never loved him, that it was all a game, a performance for my entertainment. I left because I was bored with the bandit who has no place in the civilized world. He was interesting for a week, maybe 2. Then he became boring, like everyone else. Tell him he was just a tool, money I could spend on fun. Our meetings in the saloon, our kisses under the stars, our promises. It was all a lie I told to forget my boring life. Forgive me, Cass. Or no, don't forgive. I don't deserve forgiveness. I deserve contempt and oblivion. Jack felt the earth disappearing from under his feet, as if everything he had built in his heart over 10 years was crumbling in an instant, like a house of cards in the wind. Like his faith, his hope, his love, it all turned to ash. Sarah, his Sarah, the girl he was ready to quit his bandit life for, ready to become an honest man, ready to die for. But she never loved him. It hurt worse than any bullet, worse than any gunshot, because bullets wound the body, but lies wound the soul so deeply that scars remain for a lifetime. That pain becomes part of you. Rockdale was bigger than Jack remembered. The city had grown over 10 years, transformed from a dirty settlement into something resembling civilization, a place where law was stronger than bullets. The main street now had gas lamps that burned even during the day. There were stone buildings built from beautiful red stone instead of wooden shacks. There were stores open every day. There were cafes where you could buy coffee. There was even a small library full of books about science and art. There was law. There were rules. There was the structure of society that seemed unbreakable, unchanged, eternal. But the cemetery remained the same, cold, empty, full of marble monuments that cried out about the mortality of every human being, regardless of how rich or powerful they were. Death was the great equalizer, the only place where pauper and king lay side by side, where status meant nothing, where money couldn't buy one extra day. Jack walked between gravestones, his feet sliding on grass wet with early morning dew, covered with the icy coating of the cold night. He searches for a name, searches for a face in memory, searches for proof that Sarah was real, that his love was real, even if it was one-sided. Sarah Hollister. Finally, he found her grave at the end of the 3rd row, where the cemetery turned into a forest, where cypresses stood like centuries of death, like monks praying for the dead. A white marble monument, clean and well-maintained despite all the years, despite the wind that carried dust from all over the earth. On it was engraved a date, February 2nd, 1883, exactly 2 years ago. Exactly 2 years since Sarah was laid to rest in the earth, since she returned to the earth from which she came. Fresh flowers lay before the monument, red roses, hot like blood, despite the cold wind blowing from the mountains that tried to tear them away, carry them off. Someone visited this grave regularly. Someone remembered, Someone didn't forget. Jack knelt before the stone, his hand touching cold marble, cold like Sarah's heart, cold like death. On the stone's surface, his hand left impressions, as if by his touch he wanted to wake the dead, wanted to bring her back, wanted to rewrite history. Sarah, his only true love, or his greatest mistake. Now it didn't matter. She was here, under the earth, in darkness, in solitude, in the icy embrace of the ground, and everything she was, everything she created, had long since decomposed into components, had become part of the earth, part of this hill, part of eternity. Behind him came a sound, rustling of leaves underfoot, a cautious step, as if someone was walking on fragile eggs, afraid of breaking them. Jack turned around, hand on his pistol, ready for any threat, ready to defend himself, ready to die. From the shadows between the trees came a woman, tall, dressed in black, which was sewn expensively, with a veil on her face that hid her features. That was a mask of grief. Jack stood up, tensing, preparing for the unknown. He knew this figure, knew this bearing, knew this weight of sorrow that every person who had lost someone close carried. This was a woman who wore sadness like a crown. This was Sarah. She was a young woman, perhaps 5 years younger than Jack, with the same chestnut hair that fluttered in the wind, with those same brown eyes that Jack had seen in dreams during rare moments of rest. Sarah's sister, Alice Hollister. Jack remembered her dimly, very dimly, like a man remembers dreams, like a man remembers a life he lived long ago, long, very long ago, when he still saw Sarah, when he still believed in love, when he was still young and naive. Alice was just a girl, cheerful, carefree, with braids and laughter that sounded like bells, like angelic singing, like music of hope. Now she was a woman with a bitter expression on her face, with a scar on her cheek that cut her beauty in half, leaving a mark on the left half of her face of time, pain, suffering. There was another line on her cheek, along the edge of her left eye, as if she had been beaten, as if life had treated her cruelly. Molten. She said his name slowly, as if it were a curse, as if the word was poison that needed to be spat out to avoid dying from its effects. She pronounced his name, and Jack understood that his life had to change something else, that in her voice was both pain and hope, and a demand for justice. Richard Hollister kept his residence not in the town itself, but high on a hill, in an estate that his father had built on gold, the blood of Indians and the tears of slaves brought from the south. A big house, white like bone, like a skull of death, like a monument to human greed, with columns, tall windows, with a veranda that wrapped around the house like a snake wrapping around its victim, surrounded by a huge plot of land, guarded by armed men who asked no questions and followed orders, living bags of gunpowder and hate. Jack stood with Cass and Alice on the edge of the hill, looking down at this fortress of wealth, this tower of human arrogance, this another step toward the grave. Cass polished a bullet between his palms, rotating it slowly as if it were a precious stone, as if it were a magical artifact that had the power to change fates. His face was calm, a mask, but his eyes burned with fire, the fire of revenge, the fire of justice, a fire that cannot be extinguished. 10 years of hell in a mountain hermit's cabin, 10 years of pain, recovery, reflection, 10 years that felt like 100. Every day he remembered the moment he fell, felt a bullet tear through his flesh, felt blood rush to his white shirt, felt himself fall to dust, felt dust stick to his blood creating clay that was his last bed. And all this time Cass was preparing for this moment, planning, dreaming, living with only one goal. He knew where Richard Hollister lived. He knew his daily routine, knew when he woke, what he ate, who he spoke with. He knew what time he left for the stable each evening, gazing at the sunset over the desert, smoking Cuban cigars he had imported from far away. Hollister was a man of habit, and habits end in death. Habits are the path to the grave, the red thread that leads to the end. Jack didn't feel better about the plan. He didn't want murder. Murder was easier than justice, because murder was an act of desperation, while justice was an act of will. Murder was the act of an animal. Justice was the act of a man who remembers what honor is, what justice is. In the Wild West, justice rarely comes through law, rarely comes through judges and juries bought by the money of the rich. It comes through force, through a bullet, through crossfire on a dusty street, through blood that pays a debt. It comes through the death of a man who deserved that death. Alice suggested another way. She worked as a servant in Hollister's house, knew every corridor, every room, every secret exit. She could open the gates from the inside, could divert the guards from the right path, distract them, direct them in completely the wrong direction. She had nothing to fear. Her sister is dead. Her face is disfigured. Her life is over, broken like broken glass, like a mirror that reflected her future, now reflecting only pain. She was simply doing what was necessary, what was just, what was her duty to her sister's memory. When the sun began to fall below the horizon, painting the sky in bloody shades of red and black, in shades of the end of the world, 3 figures rode onto the estate grounds through open gates. The guard was distracted by a fire in the stables. Alice had set hay on fire there, piling it in the corner, igniting it from a kerosene lamp. Horses tore from overheated stalls, screaming, stamping their hooves, raising dust into the air as if summoning demons from the earth. Hollister's men ran there, hurrying to save the animals, because animals, after all, are worth money, because a horse can be sold and a man can be killed for free. On the hill, where he could freely see the exit from the estate, Cass stood with a rifle, his eyes sparkling like those of a predator, like those of a wolf hunting its prey. Jack held the horses ready for retreat, his hand on the bridle, his mind ready for the worst, his heart ready for death. Alice led them through the inner courtyard, through rooms where Sarah once smiled, laughed, danced, lived a life that was a lie. These rooms were her rooms, her world, her prison. Now these rooms were the place of her death, the place of her torture, the place where so much blood was spilled that the earth beneath the house was red. Richard Hollister was in his stable, looking at the fire, cursing the servants for their incompetence, for their stupidity, for their inability to control the situation. He was tall, sturdy as a bull, with a face that had never known compassion, with eyes that saw people only as tools for use. His hands were big, powerful, butcher's hands, hands that had beaten a woman to death, that had left bruises on her body, that were instruments of his hate. When Alice offered him wine in his study 5 minutes after the fire was put out, after things seemed under control, he agreed without hesitation, without even looking at her. His overconfidence was his weakness. He believed he was too rich, too powerful to be vulnerable, too high to fall. Beyond the city of Rockdale begins the desert, red earth that looks like blood spilled long ago, the pain of pain that never dries. This is the land of hopelessness, the land where dreams come to die. Jack, Cass, and Alice rode through the night, but ahead torches were lit, many torches, like stars fallen from the heavenly vault. The sheriff's posse chased them, maybe 15 men, maybe 20, maybe more. Jack lost count. They were 3 against an army of law, 3 against the state, 3 against a system that protects the rich and punishes the poor. The sound of hooves created a rhythm of pursuit. Thud, 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 like a heart preparing to break, like a drum of war that had been beating since time immemorial. Cass stopped his horse at the edge of a canyon. Red rocks rose up from the earth, creating vertical walls hundreds of feet high, creating a chasm that looked like the gates of hell, that looked like the edge of the world, that looked like the end of all existence. Alice was wounded. A bullet from the guards hit her in the side when they fled the estate, when they ran from death, when they ran for justice. She was bleeding, holding onto the saddle with both hands, her face pale like death, like a ghost, like a shadow of what she was. Cass looked at her, then at Jack, then at the moon hanging over the desert like a judge. "No choice," Cass said, his voice calm like death, like an icy wind blowing from the mountains. "Someone has to stay. Someone has to distract them. Someone has to buy you time. Someone has to stay here and become the bridge between life and death." Jack nodded, understanding. He had seen this many times in his life. Sacrifice was necessary. Someone had to stay behind to give others a chance, to allow justice to triumph, to allow truth to see the light. Cass smiled with the same smile he wore in the Golden Saloon, that smile that meant both beginning and end. But now it was the smile of a man who found his purpose, his destiny, his mission, a man who was ready to pay the price that life demands. We're even, Molten. For 10 years I dreamed of revenge. 10 years I planned your death, studied your every step, every mistake, every weakness. But then I realized that death is easy. Life with guilt, life with hate, that's hard. That's agonizing. That's real punishment that lasts forever. Cass turned his horse around, directing it toward the torches, getting closer, like an army of demons. His revolver was in his hand. His voice was calm when he shouted something into the silence of the night, shouted Sarah's name as if she could hear him, as if she was here, as if she could see justice, shouted his mother's name, killed in a bandit raid when he was 5 years old, when he was still innocent, shouted about everything he lived for and everything he was ready to die for. His first shots were his own. His revolver thundered in the night, fire erupting from the barrel like the anger of gods, like vengeance that cannot be stopped. Then crossfire began. Cass rode straight into the fire of the torches, his machine gun drumming, his voice tearing the night like cloth torn by a sharp knife. Jack saw him fall from his horse, saw his body spray blood in the moonlight, saw the end of his life, his mission, his redemption. That was all that was needed. Jack grabbed Alyssa's horse, pushed her forward, down a narrow trail into the canyon, into darkness, into the unknown. They descended into darkness where a river roared, where cave beasts howled, where the echo of their escape bounced off the red rocks. They left behind Cass Turner, a man who chose justice over life, chose to punish those who suffered instead of taking revenge on himself, chose death over compromise. A month later, a small farm on the edge of civilization, where land begins to melt into desert, where red soil transforms into yellow sand, where life transitions into death, where hope transitions into oblivion. Jack sat on the porch of the house he had built himself, with the lists from wooden logs he had cut with an axe, from nails he had hammered every day, creating shelter from the storm. Her wound had healed, leaving a white scar on her rib, a reminder of that night in the desert, a reminder of the price they paid. Her face was no longer disfigured by scars. Jack helped her, found the best doctors in nearby towns, paid them with money left over from robberies, using bloody money for healing. But inner wounds didn't heal so quickly. They simply learned to live with them, like living with pain and old fractures, pain that is sharpest before rain, pain that reminds you of the past. Jack received a letter from the sheriff of Rockdale. The letter said that Cass's body was found in the canyon 2 weeks later. He was killed by the weapons of the law, his body buried in an unmarked grave on the edge of the desert, where no one visited him, where no one remembered him, where only the wind brought messages from the living. The sheriff's words were cold, soulless. Cass Turner was a wanted criminal. He committed crimes against the state. He got what he deserved. Justice has triumphed. But Jack knew the truth. Cass Turner was an angel of vengeance, a man who found a way to atone for his own sin through justice for others. Jack wrote a reply letter, but never sent it. What was there to say? The man who could have killed him 10 times instead taught him how to live. That his best friend became his greatest destiny. Alyssa came out onto the porch with 2 cups of coffee she had brewed on a small stove in the house. She wore one of the thick dresses she had sewn herself from cotton, that she chose herself, that reflected her new life, her new identity. Her hair fluttered in the wind, free, unbound, like her spirit, like her will that was finally set free. She was beautiful, not despite the scars, but because of them. Every scar was a story of survival. Every scar was proof that life continues, that pain can be transformed into beauty. "How did you know I was here?" she asked, handing him a cup, offering him hope, offering him a future. Jack smiled, the first real smile in months, a smile that came from the depths of his broken heart. "Because I wait for you. Every day. Every dawn." Alyssa sat down next to him on the porch. "Do you think about him? About Cass?" she asked softly. "Every day. The same way you think about Sarah." Jack nodded slowly, heavily, as if his head weighed a ton of pain. But it's different. I had an illusion with her. With Cass was the truth. Truth hurts more than any lie, but it heals deeper than any oblivion. They sat in silence, watching the sunset paint the earth in gold and blood. On the distant hill prowled a lone wolf, its silhouette black against the burning sky. Birds flew south, flocks that looked like black tears on a red sky. The desert lived its own life, not knowing or forgetting the people who came and went in its sand. Jack thought about Cass, thought about how justice rarely brings peace, thought about how revenge rarely soothes pain, that the only thing that remains after all this is memory and the need to live on, the need to forgive, the need to grow from ashes, the need to find meaning in pain. The sun fell below the horizon. Stars began appearing one by one, like points of light in endless darkness, like hope in the night, like proof that light exists even in the darkest hour. And Jack Molten, a former bandit, a killer, a man who lived in an illusion of love, sat next to Alice, held her hand, and understood that he had finally come home, not to a place, not to a house on the edge of the desert, but to a person, to the simplicity of admitting your mistakes and moving on, to the ability to forgive the past and embrace the future, to the ability to transform pain into beauty, hate into love, death into life. See you around, my friend. I've got another story for you.